This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
So I was kind of surprised to see in that EVH guitar that Tony from up the road lent me the other day, that I've got in that cupboard still. In the care instructions for it, it's got some comments from Eddie Van Halen, who's obviously this guitar was made for him. He says, general care instructions are included in this manual. However, the way you care for your instrument is a matter of personal preference. What I do is very basic and simple. I never clean my guitar. I never clean the strings. Dirty strings tend to have a warmer tone. Brand new or clean strings have a brighter sound again. It depends on your preference. I especially never clean the neck. I prefer my natural skin oil to condition the neck as opposed to mineral oil. It will take longer for your natural skin to condition the neck versus using mineral oil. Like fine wine, it takes time. Depending on how much you play. If you play a lot, in about 8 to 10 months, you will have the smoothest playing neck you've ever laid your hands on. I don't polish my guitars either because I prefer the guitar to age naturally. I basically restring it, intonate it, make sure the neck is straight, and make damn sure the strings are fully stretched before locking down the nut. Then I do what I love most, play. Now, what was interesting to me about that is apparently there's a history with Eddie Van Halen of actually in the earlier days, apparently he used to sometimes boil his strings overnight and clean them that way and stretch them. And there's a little bit of dispute online whether this is worth doing. It's certainly a thing that players before Eddie Van Halen and in other instruments, you know, mandolin players, bass players, I think boiling the strings is a way to get the dirt off of them. Some people do it with vinegar, some people do it with kind of like rubbing alcohol as well. And maybe get a bit more life out of them, but I think it's generally agreed that what it doesn't do is get a string back to its, you know, full self, and essentially things like where you get indentation from frets or saddles and things like that, that can't be undone essentially. So strings do have a finite life, yes, but I wonder if sometimes there definitely does seem to be a little bit of a, for some people, they potentially have strings changed every single gig. This is a thing that you sometimes hear about people that are on tour with a guitar technician. Some people have a fresh set of strings for every gig or every couple of gigs. For me, if you're at all interested, I don't change strings like, for instance, on that blue K-line very often at all, unless a string breaks. If a string breaks, then I will change the whole set. But I'm sort of, I think, on the Eddie Van Halen side of things, where I do like that new string sensation. You know, things are a bit snappier, things are a bit brighter. Once you've stretched them in a bit, which can take, you know, 10, 20 minutes, I find, of actually playing, the guitar is a bit snappier, it's a bit brighter, a bit more lively. And over time that goes away. And, you know, by comparison, older strings are a bit less snappy, less zingy. a bit duller. What I find is that if you let rust accumulate on the underside of the string, that can start to affect intonation as well. So if you're thinking this guitar is not playing as in tune as it used to, sometimes I think a string change can really help that. Or at the very least, what I do is sometimes grab like an old sock or an old pair of boxes and kind of run your finger up and down the string on the underside, and that gets rid of some of the kind of crud and stuff off of the string. And I think that can be one of the things that I do relatively often, because as I say, I don't change strings that much. It costs these days between sort of £5 to £7 to change a set of strings. If you're doing that every single gig, that could be quite an expensive habit. So for me, luckily, I don't do that. I think some people as well find that they can age strings more than other people. So for instance, Jake, friend, his sweat seems to be a little bit on the corrosive side, and his strings, and he's played some of my guitars, they do tend to dull the strings quicker than if I play them. The other thing that I find is that if you leave a guitar unplayed for a while, that's when this kind of corrosion kind of happens most of all. Whereas if you play the guitar daily, I find that the strings actually last way longer than if you kind of shut it in a cupboard. I guess another part of that is that each time after a gig, maybe you consider wiping the guitar down and getting rid of whatever is on the strings. You know, that's what the little rag in these guitar cases is for. This guitar sat in a shipping container unplayed for a year, as I did a video the other day. So this had some fairly considerable corrosion on it, but it's still completely playable, I found. And that's what's interesting to me, is like, even if you think, well, these strings definitely need replacing, you might be surprised how much life there is still in them. So as I say, get a rag or something, give it a wipe down. I think Fast Fret, which is like a bit of a string lubricant, can actually age the strings if you leave it on, but that might be a good way to get the initial bit of crud off. Let me know in the comments if you've got other ways of getting a bit more life out of your strings. I think it's a noble thing. I don't have a string sponsor. I guess most of you probably don't either. So when you have to go out and spend sort of £5 to £7 at a time, for me, I do like to try and wring every bit of life out of these things that I can. It's just interesting to hear Eddie say the same thing. Never cleaning the fretboard sounds like a recipe for dirt, doesn't it? But his fretboards in particular, I think, would have been unfinished if they're like the Ernie Ball Music Man style, where it's kind of you're using either gun stock oil or something like that, which has a very thin layer, and so the mineral oil is actually important, like barrier and stuff. So building that up over the years with actual sweat and dirt, I guess, could be a thing. So yeah, that's definitely been my experience. If your strings aren't breaking, for me, I don't tend to replace them unless things are getting quite bad. So I've got an old pair of boxers. I kind of go like this and try and get as much of the corrosion off as I can, if there is. And what I find is, if I'm playing the guitar regularly, actually this rust and stuff doesn't build up. I guess it just kind of gets played off and is not really a problem. And so I guess if you've got rusty strings, that's a sign that you're not playing that guitar enough, maybe. Let me know, how often do you change your strings? Are you like a sort of, you like strings to be on the fresher side? For me, as I say, I quite like the new string sensation, but I'm totally not going to be seeking that out every single time that I play the guitar. It's too expensive. I'll catch you in another video soon. Cheers.